Hello, everyone. So thank you for joining us. So I'm Greg Sutter, the CEO of Good Ancestors. It's good to see you all on a Friday afternoon. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, which for me in Canberra is the Ngambri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are on this call today. So you might have seen that we're recording the call today. So we realize that this is a Friday before a long weekend. It's not exactly an ideal time for a webinar. So we're going to make this recording available to people to view it over the course of next week as we sort of finalize this letter. So we're on this call today to talk about risks at the intersection of AI and biosecurity. And we're sort of people of action. So we're not here just to admire the problem. We're also here to talk about practical and impactful solutions that we could take. So this webinar is going to come in two halves. So first, we're going to hear from Dr. Cassidy Nelson on AI and biosecurity risks. And then we're going to hear from Emily Grundy about the details of the letter and its recommendations. So before we get started, just a quick rundown on the technology. So if you press the sort of 9 grid circles in the bottom right of your screen, that will sort of bring up the Q&A, and you can sort of lodge your questions there. It's helpful to thumbs up questions if you can, so that as I'm herding those questions to give them to Emily or Cassidy, I can see what people are excited to ask. So I guess before you hear more from me, I might introduce Dr. Cassidy Nelson. So Cassidy is the Director of Biosecurity Policy at the Centre for Long-Term Resilience. She has a doctorate of philosophy in biology from Oxford and a medical degree from UQ. She represents the CLTR on the UK's Engineering Biology Responsible Innovation Advisory Panel and has advised the World Health Organization. So I'll pass to Cassidy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everyone. Very glad to be here. I'll just be sharing screen now. Great. Excellent. Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was very pleased to be asked to give this talk, and I'll be giving you an overview to kick us off on the current state of AI biosecurity risk. This is a topic that my center focuses on and has been doing a lot of work at the policy intersection of for the last several years. For those who don't know, the Centre for Long-Term Resilience is an independent nonprofit, or we are based in London, but do have a global mission, and we're seeking to transform resilience to extreme risk. So events at the level of COVID-19 and above, and I lead the Biosecurity team at the Centre for Long-Term Resilience. And as I said, we've done a lot of work on topics that are related to this, including on really understanding some of the capability leaps that are happening at the AI and biosecurity intersection, as well as seeing the implications for synthetic nucleic acid screening, and seeing ways in which we could overcome different implementation challenges that governments are looking to solve in this space. And so I would like to first start us off by giving us all an overview of where the current landscape of AI and biosecurity risks currently sit. I'll then talk on synthesis screening before talking on some of the global progress that's taking place with regards to synthetic nucleic acid screening legislation around the world. And then I've left ample time and for some questions, and so very much welcome for you to log those as we go, and we will be able to chat at those on the end. So starting with the AI and biosecurity landscape. So first, it's maybe just good to zoom out and talk about what the concern here is. Governments and AI companies themselves have become quite concerned that AI could be used for misuse scenarios, especially in the CBRN domain, and biology being a main component of that's garnered a lot of concern. And when groups are thinking on this, the kind of two main pathways that the AI could facilitate harm includes helping overcome existing barriers to misuse. So in particular, making it easier for a threat actor to successfully develop a biological weapon, or potentially inspiring a greater number of attempts because the barriers are perceived to be lower than they were in the past. And then the other concern as well is that the ceiling of harm may be heightened by some of these developments as well too. What's possible to do in engineering biology, given some of the AI developments, means that the scale of the harm that would be possible might be growing. And there's a lot of different terminology that's used in this space, but broadly speaking, when we think on biological AI, we are primarily concerned around frontier AI developments, and this includes large language models, but also biological foundation models that are trained on biological sequences, as well as AI agents, and AI-enabled biological tools, of which there's various different types of in the protein design space. Maybe the most commonly known would be AlphaFold, but then also in other prediction platforms and automated experimental platforms that are enabled by artificial intelligence. And I'll say that these types of categories, just really quickly, have been collapsing over time. And in particular, agentic AI allows access and flow through of information between these types of categories in particular, meaning that the distinction is not as crisp as it was even just a few years ago. And so when we think on AI and what it means for threat actors, this is from work that we did a few years ago. But if you think on the risk pipeline between an actor who has an intention to cause harm with biology and an actual event taking place, there's many different steps that they have to go through to be able to enable that release scenario. And AI is not necessary to make a biological weapon, but it is the concern is that you could potentially uplift actors at various of these steps. And so frontier AI large language models, as well as biological design tools, have different actions at each of these different steps. And where synthetic nucleic acid screening comes in is that the hope is that we could actually help reduce one of the main choke points that's here, which is actually taking computational designed agents and for the actual material access point to be achieved through building them in the physical world. And so hence it's become a main focus of governments around the world, as well as various different actors in this space, as a main way in which to overcome some of the increased AI risks that are being monitored at the moment. And so when we think on frontier AI, so these are large language models like Claude, like Claude and ChatGPT. We can see that on some of the capability benchmarks that have been utilized by the AI Security Institute and others around the world, that the capabilities have really been extending quite significantly over time. This, in my opinion, is one of the best benchmarks available. It's called the Virology Capabilities Test, VCT. And you can see here that 2 years ago now, models that were being released surpassed that of the median expert virologists. So these are PhD trained virologists, and this is on a range of different text-based as well as multimodal questions, including audio and visual. And you can see that over time, since April 2024, the capabilities have continued increasing. And this is a graph from a report that my center released last year with RAND Europe, looking at narrower tools in this space. So this is 8 different broad categories of engineering biology tools. And you can see the number, just the number of tools that are being released is growing rapidly. We're seeing, we saw within a 2-year time frame a doubling of that over the previous 2 years. And this is across a range of different engineering biology tasks. These tools are being developed globally. We found in our data set of more than 1,100 tools, 76 different countries involved in developing these. And I'll just say that these have extensively excellent applications for biomedical science and industry applications. The concern, though, is that a subset of these do have dual use concerns. And so in our data set, where we examined 57 that were at the state of the art in capabilities across those 8 broad categories. We did find 23% were ones in which further evaluations were recommended, and 26% where a judgment call needed to be made about further following up of evaluations or red teaming. And so one of the concerns here is that the majority of these are released open source with their data available, and there's no correlation at the moment between which ones would be considered higher misuse relevant and the ones that don't have misuse relevant capabilities. And so an important paper that was released last year came from the journal Science with Whitman et al. Showing through looking at more than 75 different variants of different protein toxins that you could actually get around a traditional screening with more than 75% of AI design variants. They took known toxins, things such as ricin, and passed them through a bunch of open source tools to make different variants, and found that more than 3/4 of them were not picked up in screening. And this graph shows that what they ended up doing was instead of putting those results out publicly in the first instance, they did patching. They went through and they evaluated which ones were getting through screening and found ways to patch the screening system going forward. However, even at the end of all of this, 3% were still slipping through. And so the importance of this result that came out last year is that we're in a new paradigm of where the kind of list-based approaches that we've done for screening so far, where you could define a given toxin, know its exact sequence, and then screen against that, no longer holds with AI-generated design. That we might be able to get to the same types of dangerous designs, but using completely new sequences that preserve the function, but don't have the same underlying sequence. And so these paraphasing these toxin proteins is a major concern that's driven off a lot of action within screening companies around the world. And so that leads in nicely just to talk a little bit more on screening more generally, of why we care about it and why it's a key physical choke point. So DNA synthesis really is that step in which you have a digital sequence and are able to bring it into the physical world. And companies in the International Gene Synthesis Consortium for years now have been voluntarily screening orders against pathogen and toxin databases. And where their sequencers are flagged, they do customer identity and legitimacy verification. However, the issue is that not all companies are in this voluntary regime, and there isn't a mandate. It's by their own admission of compliance that they proceed on this. And so we see that where things are falling short are really that there are several providers globally that aren't members of the IGSC. There's also increasing availability of benchtop synthesizers, so this is equipment that you can buy, and then you don't have to go through a central ordering system. You can make things yourself in a lab. And now, very concerningly, AI-generated sequences might mean that our screening tools, as they currently stand, need updating in the same way that Whitman et al. Paper showed that updates were essential and necessary. And so this has really driven a lot of interest in many different jurisdictions around the world in trying to understand if a mandate on screening is now going to be required. Screening has been talked about for decades, but it's really these AI-generated designs that have really spurred off a lot of action in a lot of different jurisdictions. One thing that my center noticed last year was that there wasn't a robust cost-benefit analysis available of how the security benefits would be realized against potential costs to industry and government. And so we completed, in the UK context, a nationwide cost-benefit analysis using Green Book Treasury methodology. And what we found was that even under very conservative assumptions, the policy did deliver a net benefit of £150 million per year to the UK over the next 20 years. And importantly, that for every pound of cost, we gain £3.50 in security and safety. Importantly as well, too, we found that this was only if the UK took action, but that if we went out to experts and discussed whether or not there would be foreign orders that would outside of the UK that potentially would also start following suit, following this policy. And we found that if even just 5 to 40% of foreign orders mirrored our policy, we could have up to £970 million per year in terms of the safety and security benefits of preventing misuse events. So I'll just quickly give an overview of the global progress that we've seen so far. So there's been a lot of momentum, as I say, in various jurisdictions around the world. The US has introduced draft legislation to mandate screening just in February of this year. In the EU, in December, the EU's Biotech Act includes regulations for requirements for screening, including on those that are selling to the EU market. So not just affecting EU companies, but also people who want to access the EU market as well too, including KYC customer checks with regards to screening. And in the UK, we had voluntary guidance released in 2024. And then in June of last year, the government is committed to a 12-month timeframe to analyze whether or not we'll take forward the voluntary guidance into mandatory legislation. And so that decision is due by June of this year. And in New Zealand, the draft gene technology bill was the world's first to include a screening mandate in its provisions as well, and that's something that we've seen as a very welcome step with the UK policymakers that we work with closely. But all of these are still in draft form. And so I do want to say that Australia, especially with its 2015 Biosecurity Act, and as a founding Australia Group member, still has a track record in which they could lead here and could have action that comes before this. I'll say I used to work as a clinical doctor in Australia, including as a human biosecurity officer under the 2015 Biosecurity Act. So I know well that Australia already has within its provisions ways in which it could approach this, and potentially even faster if legislation is not needed like it is in these other jurisdictions. There's a way that Australia, as it's done before in various other aspects of biosecurity, could really pave the way and lead forward. So just in conclusion, AI capabilities around the world are accelerating faster than safeguards, and we're seeing this quite robustly through the different AI security institutes that have now been set up globally and are monitoring these capability leaps. And screening is very much, as our cost-benefit analysis from last year showed, a relatively low-cost but high-benefit technology that is currently mature, and we do currently have availability of free tools for screening providers. It's not inventing things from scratch, given the number of providers that already do voluntarily screen. And in Australia, there's already existing powers, as I said, under the Biosecurity Act 2015, and that are potentially sufficient for progressing things without legislation, unlike other jurisdictions that might need primary legislation to move forward. And so acting now just could really put Australia at the front of an emerging global norm as the trend just continues to take off in more jurisdiction as well. And I see this as very much a positive case of that we do have a window right now for proactive governance, even as the risk landscape changes. But I do worry that proactive governance window is narrowing, and so very, very keen for us to have global progress on this issue, given what's at stake. So thank you, and I welcome questions.
Yeah, thank you, Cassidy. If people have questions, you can press that 9-dot grid in the bottom right and enter a Q&A. I might be sneaky and have the first question while other people sort of put questions in. I think a lot of the time when we think about mitigating AI risks, we think about like AI solutions to AI risks, and maybe in the biosecurity space, we're kind of thinking of solutions outside of that domain. I think like Mythos and this sort of Project Glasswing have been an example of that, where it's like that the AI tool is given to the defenders before it's given to the adversaries so that we can prepare better. Is that sort of another reason to have mandated screening? Because then you've got someone who could, like if we have a mythos moment for biosecurity, the screeners could then use that tool to up our defenses. And if everyone's screening, that's the way forward. Or is it, yeah, is there other ways we could prepare for that or be ready for that kind of mythos moment for biosecurity?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and that's a very active conversation that I hear in many circles. Mythos is obviously really well known and documented for the cyber capabilities, but did have rise up in the bio domain, and there's a concern that I think even has been voiced publicly by Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, about a concern of in the next 12 months having a mythos for bio moment. When I think on what would need to be done under that way, it's very clear that doing things at the model level alone would be insufficient. And synthesis screening has just routinely been one of those that comes up as it is the way in which the majority, not all, not states and others, but the majority of different threat actors in the non-state category group could potentially access the physical materials by which they would need to make a biological agent. And so very much you could use this to help robustly make screening even better. And in particular, doing something that I think we'll end up needing to get to, which is a better sense of functional prediction on the actual sequences themselves. So using AI tools in a way that different defense agencies in the U.S. have previously attempted, but they were a bit before their time with the FungiCat program and out of IARPA, for example, trying to actually understand what a dangerous sequence of concern is from a more fundamental point of view. So you could do screening against something that's much more agile, especially when you're in a state of design being possible. And so yes, very much think that a robust screening program that would come out of a mythos for bio moment would include a AI aided help of defensive actors trying to make screening more robust against AI generated sequences.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Mike in the chat, and he's asking whether or not there's any campaign to require screening at an international level. So could you put it into international treaties or the Biological Weapons Convention or something like this?
Yes, yeah. So there's been quite a bit of action internationally. I've only focused on four jurisdictions, but I'll just say that various other ones have also been quite interested in this. And one of the main undertakings that is occurring at the moment is that there's been an ISO standard developed, and there is an IBIS, the International Biosecurity and Biosafety group out of Switzerland, who's been really leading the charge on getting together on establishing the requirements for that ISO standard. They had a launch last year with regards to the consortium that involves China, India, other countries around the world that are big players in the synthesis provider space to really decide on the standard mechanism there. And so if we had an ISO standard available, we would be able to have harmonization. And that's what we do hear from a lot of different actors in the space, is that pretty much everyone agrees that there needs to be action done here, but there's a concern that, you know, if we have multiple different regimes, multiple different ways of screening, that's not harmonized, it could be place a burden on companies and on users of synthetic nucleic acids. Having harmonization really solves that, and also means you don't have to invent each time from scratch your concern list. We could have a shared understanding of how to approach screening. So yeah, I think that space has been very active and will be undergoing further developments this year.
Thank you. So a question from Duncan about desktop synthesis machines. Mm. I think you mentioned this in your talk. So I mean, maybe the two halves of the question are, like, where's this technology at? Like, is this something that's available now, or is this still something that's a little while away? And then secondly, is this something we should be worried about? Like, is this a vulnerability in legislation and something we should be looking to regulate?
So it is a technology that has been developed. It's not widely available, but it is possible for groups to access. What issue is yes, all jurisdictions know that this is this is a major barrier here, in part because the safeguards that are applicable to benchtop synthesizers, which various groups who have been involved in manufacturing them, have really tried to explore. Unfortunately, just don't hold up. The idea of being able to have to call home and then tell what sequence you're printing, type of thing, is not something that's like robustly been able to be integrated into all the systems available. And so there is a concern that there might be a kind of bigger market push away from having centrally distributed synthetic nucleic acids, more so to these types of benchtop devices. And at the moment, there's no restriction on that that's been rolled out to the degree necessary. So it would be an area in which legislation would need to address, and the Australia group has good precedent in this type of way. I think that's one that could be drawn upon, about going, maybe we just do decide if safeguards are insufficient, that until companies can build ones that are more robust, that we do maintain commercial synthesis access through central nodes that screen.
Thank you. So a question from Sansford. I think one of your early slides, you mentioned defensive strategies. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about what defensive strategies are, and if there's like a technical component that people could work on.
Yeah. So this is an area that we've been really excited by. We've been doing a lot of work on defensive acceleration, which is not a new concept. It came from Matt Clifford a few years ago, who helped set up our AI Security Institute here in the UK. But what we found is that there wasn't as much operationalization of what this means. And so defensive acceleration really is about getting AI into the hands of defensive actors before threat actors, and actually differentially developing technology so that you are, instead of letting it just proliferate agnostic to kind of maybe the use case, purposely making technologies that favor defensive applications, opposed to not making a judgment call on that. And so there's a few areas that are extremely promising in this space in particular. But AI can really help with know your customer, KYC style checks, and we've seen really great developments that are coming out of various groups that really are accelerating the ability for AI to be assisting in this area. It's not an area that's been galvanized quite as much as I think it could. And the other way is actually in understanding sequences themselves. So screening is often divided into two parts of know your customer checks as well as sequence screening. But then using AI in particular to understand what is the actual function of what we're doing, because ultimately it isn't. The field talks about sequences of concern. Ultimately, it isn't the sequence itself; it's the function of that sequence that we're concerned about. But that requires much more sophisticated ways in which of understanding the function that a sequence is delivering, especially when we're in an era, as we know we are now, with AI-generated designs, and companies themselves telling us that they're seeing orders of things that are just quite alien of what things are. Almost certainly most of those are benign, but it means that we're kind of blind as to what AI-generated designs are going to be able to do without AI being able to help this along. I'll say defensive acceleration also just applies across a range of other areas as well too, but in synthesis screening, I think those in particular could really be galvanized.
Thank you, Cassidy.
Thank you. I'm conscious of Cassidy's time, but I'll try and squeeze in one more question, if that's okay. Before we let
no
you
worries.
go,
Yeah.
Cassidy. So I'm going to merge two together from James and Martin. So Martin's asking, like, if someone's asking me, like, why should this matter to me? Like, what would you say to someone? Like, is there likely to be a warning shot? Like, is this something that's going to impact people in their everyday lives? And James, I think, is asking a similar question, but maybe with a slightly more technical bent, sort of saying, like, what are the likelihoods in the immediate term or the midterm or the long term of having these sort of AI-enabled pandemics of various kinds? So, yeah, I mean, maybe if you could just sort of like, how practical is this concern? Is this a realistic concern, or are we sort of talking sci-fi stuff here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really fair question. It's good to ground this. Thankfully, we don't have biological incidences happening at the same rate as maybe other accidents. We have cyber attacks all the time. We don't have pandemics every single day from this. What the concern though is that that the rising risk level is much higher than we would really withstand within other industries. So I think the best data that's currently available on this now outside of threat intelligence circles is using the Forecasting Research Institute's methodology and techniques, and so they have forecasted a current 1.5% annual rate of event that's over 100,000 deaths, and higher than that, obviously at a lower rate. And one of the concerns that they have is that with the AI developments that have already occurred now with what's been shown through things like the benchmark of the virology capabilities test, is that there's been a 5-fold increase over top of the pre-AI developments. Obviously, forecasting results are, there's limitations to that methodology, but at the same time, that tracks with the way that different governments around the world are taking seriously these risks. In particular, AI security institutes with their standing bodies of chemical and biological domain defense. There's a real concern that the historical precedent of the rates of ricin attempts or other things like this might not be fully illustrative of what the current kind of baseline risk level is. And I kind of see it in a way of in terms of like the relevance to people's lives. We've all just lived through a COVID-19 pandemic, and the idea that we would withstand a few percent a year of someone doing something potentially even worse than that, especially given biology transmits for itself, is the reason why I'm motivated to work in this area. Is that it's unlike any other weapon in this type of way, because it can have this wider spread effect on people and populations, and we wouldn't withstand in other industries. We wouldn't withstand a 1.5% rate per year of a nuclear meltdown of a nuclear plant or other things like this, even though that's geographically limited, unlike pandemic type agents. And so both don't think it's useful or accurate for people to fearmonger in this space, while at the same time tracing it back down to the risk that we take in aviation or other industries. How do we go about approaching potentially large scale catastrophes like the pandemics can cause?
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Cassidy. It's really appreciated. We'll let you get on with your day, and we'll talk about a little more specifically. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Thanks to Greg for putting this together, and hope you have good evenings.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much. See you guys.
So I'll pass now to Emily Grundy. So Emily is a policy officer at Good Ancestors, and she's done the bulk of the work behind this letter, the drafting of it, and the research to support it. So big thanks to Emily on that. And she previously worked at MIT Future Tech, focusing on articulating risks from AI and developing measures to sort of assess AI safety preparedness. So thank you, Emily.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. So Cassidy has provided us with a great overview of the landscape. And what I want to do now is zoom in on the Australian context and unpack what current legislation we have, like what are the gaps, and also start talking about our open letter and what specifically we've recommended in this space. So I will say that Good Ancestors has been working on this area of biosecurity risk, and especially the idea of AI exacerbating that, for a few years. We've submitted to a lot of different consultations and inquiries, like the Commonwealth COVID inquiry, lots of biosecurity and immunization strategies. We also ran an open letter in 2023 on pandemic prevention. So pretty much anywhere where there was a place to recommend measures to prevent or respond to a potential pandemic. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you who supported that work over the past few years, probably quite a few of you on this call. who shared things, who attended workshops or talks like this, who contacted your local MP, who made a submission to an inquiry. I think it just, yeah, helps an immense amount. And honestly, yeah, we could not do what we do without the support of all of you. And with that support, I think government is in fact acknowledging that this is a problem and this is something that needs to be addressed. So a very concrete example of that is that in the National AI Plan that was published at the end of last year, we had a statement about Home Affairs coordinating this multi-agency group on synthetic biology and AI. So they are acknowledging that this is something to monitor and something to address. And I think statements like these, even if they sound quite small, are very important because they provide us with a hook, something that we can refer back to and say, hey, government said they would do something about this. Here are some things it could do. So concretely, what we've done is we've created this open letter, which probably quite a few of you have seen. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. But the two main reasons behind doing that, one is to suggest what could be done to deliver on what the plan has said and to take action on this. And the other is also to motivate action. So we understand that this multi-group has been meeting for around about a year, but hasn't yet taken concrete public actions. And so something like an open letter, which demonstrates both expert and public support for these measures, I think can get the ball rolling. So what actually does Australia do at the moment regarding these risks? So I'm going to just explain briefly what the current legislation is like, and Cassidy touched a bit on that. And that will help us understand what the gap is and then what the open letter is trying to address. So Australia does actually have a lot of powers in theory to do something about this. And the Australian government is committed to reducing biosecurity risks to a very low level. This is a very explicit and intentional commitment that they have made. One of the most important pieces of legislation here is the Biosecurity Act, which manages biosecurity risk in Australia. So it's designed to contain or control diseases and pests that could harm humans, the animals, plants, environments, and so on. So we have the Biosecurity Act. We also have BICON, which is the Biosecurity Import Conditions System. So this is the permit system for biological imports. It's like the practical machinery through which the Biosecurity Act operates. So it's the system that determines what can come in and what can't come into Australia and the conditions under which it can. So Biosecurity Act is a law. BICON is like the tool or where that law meets the real world of imports. What's relevant to us today and what's relevant to synthetic nucleic acids is that these are covered under BICON, and there are certain conditions around which you can import them into Australia. So if you're importing synthetic nucleic acids that are similar to a disease agent into Australia, you need an import permit. When you import them, you have to declare that you're not ordering pathogens that are in a specific excluded high-risk list. So this is good. The manufacturer or the provider that ships those goods, they have to attest that material is also not on that dangerous excluded list. So we do have some safeguards here. Importers need a permit. They need to declare what they're bringing in is not in this high risk category. And then manufacturers also have to back that up. So what are we missing? BICON and this permit system, it specified what has to be declared, but it doesn't specify the standard or the process for declaring that. So at the moment, there's no requirement that providers have to screen orders thoroughly for sequences of concern. Like I said before, they have to declare the material isn't from this specifically excluded list, things like smallpox or foot and mouth disease, but there's no obvious standard that's attached to that declaration. And they don't have to screen for these sequences of concern. Like Cassidy mentioned, these are potentially dangerous genetic sequences that could be harmful even if they're not from a specifically named pathogen. There's also no requirement to verify who is actually placing the order. or whether they have a legitimate use for a sequence of concern. This is getting into the more know your customer requirements that Cassidy mentioned. And there's also no requirement for transparency about how manufacturers are making this declaration and what level of screening actually occurred. So we do have some safeguards in place, but there still are things that could slip through. So someone could obtain a permit, they could order from a provider that does no thorough screening, and the current system would not pick that up. There's a question about how common that might be or how likely that might be. And honestly, it's like very difficult to say. What we do know is that there is the International Gene Synthesis Consortium, the IGSC, and members of that, these manufacturers, they are voluntarily committing to screening for these sequences and screening customers. And a lot of the major providers are part of the IGSC. And a lot of universities and legitimate researchers in Australia do order from the major providers. So in that sense, it's a good thing. But what we want to make sure is that every provider is screening thoroughly so that nothing is slipping through the gaps. So we recently published an open letter where we make 3 recommendations to address these gaps. The first recommendation we make is that we want a screening condition on Bicon permits where all synthetic nucleic acids are sourced from providers that screen. I think one of the strengths of this open letter and this recommendation in particular is that, as Cassidy mentioned, it doesn't require legislative change. So it's a lot more tractable and easier to get through. So the Director of Biosecurity already has the powers to attach conditions to these Bicon permits like this one. The second recommendation is around consistently applying the fit and proper person test. This is a form of government background check that goes beyond what providers can do when they're screening customers. And we think this should be applied when there are higher risk permits involved. Again, the Biosecurity Act already allows the Director of Biosecurity to administer this test, but it's at their discretion and there's no real transparency around when or how it's administered. So we would like the department, specifically the Department of Agriculture, to publish clear criteria for when and how it's used. Now, these 2 recommendations, I think, are pretty good, but they are definitely not perfect and they don't address some of the emerging issues, one of which is benchtop DNA synthesizers, which we mentioned in the Q&A. So the third recommendation is to do a departmental review into the adequacy of the current regime. So, like I said, there are some emerging issues. These recommendations also don't address domestic production of synthetic nucleic acids. They focus on import because currently majority of, there's not much of a domestic industry in Australia. So most of the synthetic nucleic acids are coming from overseas, hence targeting that one. But we do think that there should be review and action in this space. There's also the element of how do you verify that manufacturers or providers are doing thorough screening? Like, what is your kind of compliance checking? And we also think such a review should look into that as well. Just briefly, a few of the benefits that could come from taking these kinds of actions. One is just the direct domestic benefit. So we're trying to reduce the risk that dangerous sequences come into Australia through unscreened providers or through providers that aren't screening adequately or to an acceptable standard. There's also this policy diffusion aspect where action in Australia can strengthen the international case. So we've heard examples of the New Zealand Gene Technology Bill. Even though it hasn't yet passed, it's had a very positive impact on advocacy in other regions like the EU, because it demonstrates that other countries are taking action on this, they're establishing a norm, and Australia can create a similar sort of precedent. And also, given it doesn't require legislative change, you could do it potentially quite fast. And this third benefit is around business pressure. So if Australia requires screening, providers that don't currently screen have a choice. Either they screen their orders or they lose Australian businesses. And that creates pressure for these providers to screen by default, not just for Australian customers, but globally. So that's a basic overview of the Australian context, the current gaps in it, and what our open letter covers. I think Greg might have been looking through the questions if there are any. So we'll take some questions at the moment, and then we'll have a chance to look at the open letter and sign it if you wish.
So I'll just give people a minute to put questions in if you have any. I might ask Emily a sort of a Dorothy Dixon question to get started, though. I guess asking about the process for preparing this letter. So is this just something that you cooked up overnight one day, or like have you been talking to experts, and like how many experts have you talked to, and how long you've been working on this kind of thing to make it sort of expert driven?
Yeah, great. What a delightful question. No, this has not been a solo venture of Good Ancestors. So we've spent the past few months talking to a whole range of domestic and global experts in the AI space, biosecurity space, specifically gene synthesis screening space, and gone through many, many drafts of this open letter and many comments. So I think one thing that we're like very willing to admit is that we are not biosecurity experts. Greg and I are not biosecurity experts, but we are trying to push this policy action, and we are connecting the biosecurity experts with people in policy and like taking their recommendations. So yeah, it's been a huge part of this has been talking to people and getting their insight into this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Emily. There was one question from Bridget, which I think was directed at Cassie while she was here, but I think we might be able to have a swing at it, which is, how does mitigating risks from AI-enabled bioweapons, so like the screening topics we're talking about, sort of synergize with or be different from other kinds of pandemic preparedness work? Did you want to have a swing at that, or do you want me to share some views on that?
I'm happy for you to take it.
Sure. So, I mean, to me, yeah, like if people have worked in emergency management, there's like the PPRR cycle, which is sort of, preparing for and learning from, and then how you're like responding and recovering from disasters. And a lot of the resilience preparedness work is sort of asking, like, if we have a pandemic, like, can we give people masks? Can we keep the lights on? Like, what are we going to, like, can we roll out vaccines quickly? That's obviously important work. In my view, it'd be much better to prevent the pandemic from happening in the first place. Like, I think that prevention is better than cure. And it's almost like the more consequential a disaster is, the sort of more important it becomes to try and prevent that disaster. So yeah, my view is that these are like different things, like they're different parts of the ecosystem. So they're not really, like, one isn't really trading off or harming against the other, but I think it's important to have investment across that spread. There's a question from Chris in the chat, which I'm going to try and read at the same time as saying out loud. So Chris is asking, would publishing specific criteria for being able to import these compounds risk creating a situation where there's subjective evidence pointing towards someone who's untrustworthy, but the rules prevent us from restricting their access to such imports? So I guess there's a few steps here. So one of them is if people inside labs know that their orders are going to be screened, then this is a disincentive for them to kind of like place the risky order in the first place, right? Like if someone has a grudge, or they've gone off the rails in whatever way, the fact that they know there are hurdles down a particular path might set them onto a different path. And so I think that the publishing of this is a very useful thing to do. Yeah, I guess the other thing with know your customer requirements is that, like, there's sort of maybe two levels of know your customer requirements that we've talked through. So one of them is like the know your customer screening done by the person who's receiving the order. So they might be asking, like, is this person working at university? Like, do they have some research project that is funded and sort of goes to this topic? There's also know your customer screening, or fit and proper person screening, enabled by the Biosecurity Act. So this might be more asking, like, is this person known to intelligence agencies? Is this person known to police? And currently, we don't know this for sure, but we have a concern that someone could place an order in Australia to someone that screens, and that person could say, like, no, this Greg Sadler guy, like, he has no business ordering this sequence. I'm not going to fulfill that. And therefore they reject the order. But there might be no feedback mechanism where the Australian Federal Police or ASIO is told, like, hey, this Greg Sadler guy, like, he's ordering these dangerous sequences. And so, yeah, like, I think there's many more benefits in stitching together this know your customer rather than downside. So there's a question asking, is anyone opposed to this measure? This seems like a no regrets easy thing to do. Like, what's the strongest opposition case to this? I wonder if Emily wanted to have a view on this, and maybe I can have a thought too.
I think when people initially encounter this, they're worried that it will place a burden on researchers or universities, and it will slow down the positive research, which is mostly occurring with these synthetic nucleic acids. And I think that's like a very valid concern. Like, there is so much good research, medical research on vaccinations and so on, that we don't want to be slowing down. I think the majority of major providers are already doing this. So what we're recommending is not really a change to the norm. It's more like targeting the very specific gap and the minority of providers that may not be doing this. So I think that's like a valid concern to have at the outset, but then when you actually look into it, it's like, no, we just want to establish that this should be a consistent thing that's applied. So I think I just brought that up and then got to shut it down.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, when I've heard objections or concerns to this, they heavily turn on, is this bureaucratic barriers to important research? Is this adding costs? Is this adding costs to research that are unnecessary? I guess our sense is that, or at least my sense is that, most reputable researchers are already ordering from people like Twist that are already doing this voluntary screening. And so if government implemented this policy and you were just working at a university, like, maybe when you receive your 50-page permit, there's an extra footnote somewhere saying that screening is required. But because you're already ordering from someone who's screening, and they're probably already doing that anyway, like, you wouldn't notice any change in your workflow. But by having that screening, like, we're building something that would be very important in that kind of like mythos for bio world, and we're also creating a real problem for wrongdoers or people who aren't using reputable suppliers. Look, we've only got a few minutes left, so I might just move us along a bit. So firstly, a big thank you to Emily for that talk, but also all the work she's put into this project. That's excellent. So a few things we can do before we wrap up is firstly, if you haven't already and you've been persuaded by the arguments that Cassidy or Good Ancestors have presented today, it would make a massive difference to this project if you could click on that letter to the link and consider adding your signature to it. It's also very useful to share that with others. So at the bottom of that page, there's like a click on your LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever your social media of choice is to sort of say, I've signed this letter today. I went to this webinar. I thought this was a really clear and good thing to do. Maybe you want to think about it as well. So that's a specific way that you could help us. Or if you're not a social media user, you send a text to a friend who is into these kinds of issues, and that would help us out as well. In terms of staying in touch, this is unlikely to happen tomorrow, but I think it is something that we can hope is going to happen this year, maybe. We know that there's various government sort of consideration points for the implementation of the National AI Plan, and we hope that this will come up in those conversations, and we'll see this sort of concrete action before too long. So if you want to stay abreast of that, like if you go to the Australians for AI Safety website, you can sort of put in your email address, and you'll get the emails that we put out. Similarly, Good Ancestors has our own newsletters. If you go to our newsletter page, I'll just link into the chat. So there you can sign up either for an email about our organization, and we don't send those out very often, maybe a couple of times a year, just to tell you what we've been up to as a not-for-profit. And there's also a newsletter there about AI policy. So we sort of give like a monthly, like quite detailed brief about like what's happening in AI policy in Australia, and you can scroll through that and sort of see the news and trust that if there's action on this, it will be a top story in our monthly newsletter. So, I mean, that's maybe all we have today. So, I mean, thank you so much for joining us on your Friday afternoon, especially if you've got a long weekend this weekend. It means a lot to Emily and I, and thank you to Cassidy. Cassidy, for coming here and for your support. It means a lot. So enjoy your weekends.
Thanks so much, everyone.